Welcome to Transgender. I'm Joe and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya and I'm the daughter.
You know, I worked my way through college playing in a rock group.
Yeah.
We decided to change our name to the Knobs.
The Knobs?
Yes, KNOBS. That way we hope to open for the Doors.
We're here with my good friends, Ameera and Julia. I have known the two of you for quite a long time now. Ameera and Julia are both trans women. They are married and they both are Muslims. We really wanted to talk about their relationship, their transitions, and their faith and how all of that fits together. I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. So welcome. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us.
Thanks for having us. I hope you haven't overhyped us.
We'll do our best.
Ameera, let's have you start. Would you tell us a little bit about your story?
I'm Ameera Khan. I am today using she, her pronouns. I identify as a bigender trans woman. I am a DevOps engineer, so I'm working in software, staring at screens all day. Have been doing that for 5 years. I'm also Muslim. To some people, I might be Muslim-ish, and I'm okay with that. I find a lot of power and, I guess, cosmic direction with spirituality and with faith. Without it, I would not be the same person. I am here today as both holy and queer.
Nice. And it's one of the things that I think has made me resonate with you so much, is I feel like we have very kindred spirits in that respect. Julia, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Julia Khan, she, her. I am a trans woman, queer, married to the love of my life. My career has gone in a lot of places. I started off as a chemistry teacher, switched to industry, switched to software engineering, where I'm now. This one's influence. I'm also Muslim, though I reverted to Islam in 2020. I think before that, I would say it was more spiritual and trying to find exactly where my niche was. And when I met Ameera and we ended up kind of quarantining together, I learned a lot more about Islam through her and kind of found my way there. I find faith is a really great source of community. We have a lot of wonderful friends that we're able to share that with.
Did you convert because of Ameera, or did you find it before that?
So that's a great question. A lot of people, especially when they see, oh, it's a brown girl and a white girl, and the white girl reverted to Islam, there's this assumption I did that so I could get married to her, which it kind of went the other way around, is that we started dating and I was somewhat looking for exactly where I fit in spiritually. I kind of found my way to really appreciating how similar what Ameera felt was to how I felt and finding a home in that. And so I was brought to Islam through Ameera, but that was kind of incidental to us getting married and etc.
You use the word that you reverted rather than converted.
Chronically, there's this idea that we are all born Muslim, but we're also born forgetful. And so it's often people who you might say convert or revert. You might use those kind of interchangeably, but the revert comes from the idea that you're coming back to something that was a part of you, even if you didn't really remember that.
Are you both or either of you very active in the faith, or are you just call yourself Muslim and that you're not practicing, or where are you at this point on the scale?
We're practicing. So, we'll fast. We'll get together with community for Eid, during Ramadan for iftars. If we've got people together, we'll pray in community. I'm not making it to Juma every Friday like I used to. That's kind of gotten away from me lately. But I would say that it is a part of my life that matters to me a good deal.
Faith is both an individual and a community practice, and it can look different in both of those contexts. So I don't think that someone who practices their faith isolated from community is necessarily less faithful than someone who does it in community. But how that looks is different. And because of our identities, we have like sort of a fraught relationship with community. And so the way our community has evolved has influenced the way our spirituality, our faith, and its practice has evolved.
Now, you do have affirming community right now. Is that true? Would you talk a little bit about that and where you have found to best fit?
Yeah, it's for me personally, it's taken a long time. Like my journey, having grown up in the mainstream sort of Muslim Sunni community in St. Louis, Missouri, having had that, I had a very rigid idea of what theology was supposed to look like, right? And a lot of the Sunni Muslim theology is influenced by sort of Protestant Christian influence, right? So there's a lot of sort of borrowed arguments. In particular, what's relevant to our discussion today is the idea of sort of equating Sodom and Gomorrah with the criminalization or the haramization, I guess, of homosexuality. And then also by a very long stretch of the imagination, also to transgender identity. If you look at Islamic law generally, right, in Islamic, like the tenets of the faith, right, there are high level tenets of the faith and there are lower level tenets of the faith. I have a bit of a comedy routine sometimes where I talk about how Muslim and Jews are so similar because we nitpick about the smallest legislative details ever that nobody would even think about. Right? Jews will talk about like can you attend a kink party or something during the Sabbath, or something like that. Yeah, I don't.
Richard Feynman was once hired to come in and consult with a bunch of rabbis. And when he got there, the question that they had for him was, is electricity fire? And they were concerned about using the elevator on the Sabbath because that might make a spark and constitute fire.
And what kinds of similar things would you find yourself?
Yeah, I grew up like in very heavily entrenched in the Muslim community. So, and I actually have a title as Hafiza, as someone which literally means guardian, but it refers to someone who has memorized the entire Quran in its original Arabic cover to cover.
And you can still recite
Yes.
any of the surahs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's quite. How long did that take you to learn?
2.5 years.
Yeah, wow.
You finished at 13?
I finished at the age of 13. Yeah, March 3rd, 2009. But yeah, so like I grew up really entrenched in that. So people would have all sorts of dialogues about very like stupid things, frankly, like, what if you're on an airplane and you're moving so fast because of the acceleration and you don't know if you farted or not? So does that count as you losing your purification for prayer, It's like things like this, You're not in space and you want to pray, but you have to face towards Mecca when you pray, but now you don't know where Mecca is on the globe because it's cloudy. Like which way do you pray? And these have specific answers depending on who you ask, right? If you face the earth, it's generally okay and God thinks it's all right, is what people who know religion tell us, right? Just understanding how seriously Muslims take their faith, right? Because they get into such nitpicky, weird, like edge cases. And so I took theology very seriously as a kid growing up. And there were all of these borrowed arguments from like Victorian era Christian morals, right? About sort of homosexuality not being allowed or God doesn't like it. And so thus specifically like penetration from behind was considered an illegal act. And so then when I was asking, well, what about lesbians? They're like, yeah, same thing. But like it was not very theologically rigorous at all. And so I would wonder about that. And only when I sort of deconstructed the notions, right? The legislation that talks about, and when I say legislation, it's very loose. It's terms of scholarly interpretation, right? It's not like the Supreme Court ruling or whatever, unless you go country by country and look at, the laws that different countries have. But Islamic doctrine is very, how do you say? There are multiple sources of truth, and if you look hard enough, you can find a scholar that says whatever you want, right? But the idea of engaging in faith is that you engage in good faith, right? And you find a theology that you legitimately believe in and not trying to pick out what you want to believe. So this was a hard thing for me because I wanted to believe that God accepted queer people. And I didn't have the tools, the theological tools to really understand that and get to that point. So it took me a lot of deconstructing what I was taught, the arguments around, like Sodom and Gomorrah, and like really looking even at the bases for these arguments, and seeing how they were based in misinterpretations of Arabic. And if you go back to Christianity, in misinterpretations of Hebrew and Aramaic, right? Looking at all of that made me understand that the heart of the lesson with Sodom and Gomorrah was not that homosexuality was bad, but that doing things without consent was bad, right? And taking advantage of people who are in a worse off position than you, that's a bad thing. That's what I learned from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah after I learned to disentangle all the homophobia and the transphobia from it. And once I was able to do that, once I had the theological tools to do that, which were given to me by finding LGBTQ affirming Muslim community and LGBTQ affirming Christian community, once I had those theological tools to disentangle that, then I began understanding, well, what else have I been taught that is incorrect, that God cares about or doesn't care about, that other people will tell me that we're supposed to care about or not care about. And so that's sort of where I was able to affirm myself on a deeper spiritual level and understand I can be holy and queer. I am holy and queer. And there's no one that can take that away from me, no matter how they want to say, God believes this or that.
I'm Chuck Reynolds, and I started listening to Transgender because Joe is my friend. I keep listening because I have friends, colleagues, and family members who are part of the LGBTQ community, and I want to better understand their struggles and perspectives. I have become a supporter because I believe Joe and Raya are truly helping to preserve relationships and save lives. Join me in supporting Transcendent. Just go to transcendent.com, click on support, and select the amount you'd like to give each month. It can be as little as $3, and you can cancel at any time.
How did you find community? Where did you go in order to take those first steps? Because I imagine that must have been very, very scary.
Yeah, I grew up thinking I was the only queer Muslim in the whole world for so many years. I was like, there's no one like me out there. We don't exist, which is what the government of Qatar will tell you today, for example. They say that there are no LGBTQ people in our country, and that's why we don't have to create legislation to protect them or whatever, So,
when I was in college, we had the president of Iran speak to us. Someone asked that question, and he says, "We don't have any people like that." And the entire audience busted out in laughter. Really? And he was really surprised.
Because we've been fed different propaganda than they have, right? Because all of us have been fed some kind of propaganda that we believe in.
Of
And
course.
what we have is different from what Iranians have. So, yeah. So how did I find community? I didn't for a very long time. I stewed with all of this internally, and I could only talk about it with allies that I thought would be safe people to talk about it with. And I had like white atheist allies or Christian allies, but they wouldn't understand what it's like being a brown trans or a brown Muslim rather, right? Even before I realized I was trans. So only when I found a straight cis Muslim ally was I able to actually talk about all of these different theological considerations that were on my mind and were leading me to suicidal thoughts as like someone who thought God hated me, but also realizing God made me this way, right? So to find community, it took me reaching the brink of desperation. And for me, what I do when I'm in desperate is sort of like the caged bird sings. And so I have to talk about it somehow. And I performed a spoken word piece of poetry about being queer. And I came out of the closet on stage in front of like 200 Muslims in Knoxville through my spoken word. And there were so many different mixed reactions from all of these, 100 plus people, right? Some people were came up to me and were like, thank you so much for talking about this. It really needs to be talked about in the Muslim community, right? This was maybe 2015. Some people apologized on behalf of the organization that had put the conference on for even allowing me to perform this piece and not having screened it properly in their minds. And then one person came up to me after this who said, you did so good. Thank you so much for like sharing this with us. I happen to know one person who is not even queer, but they're Muslim and they are progressive and they probably would be really cool for you to meet. Also, you both happen to be Bangladeshi, so you should link up. And I was like, great. I don't have any contacts anywhere. Of course, please connect me with them. And then I got connected via Facebook to Shahana Hanif, who, if this name rings a bell, today she is the first Bangladeshi city councilwoman for New York City. She's gotten pretty far in the world, but in the beginning, I was just connected to her and she added me to a Facebook group of other LGBTQ Muslims. That's where I was like, whoa, I'm not the only one on the planet, right?
But when you thought you were, that must have been very difficult for you to eventually come out.
I spent so many nights just on my prayer mat crying and begging and arguing with God. Like, why? Why would you make me this way if you didn't want me to be this way? How much of myself do I have to give and sacrifice and allow myself to die in order to have, in order to be able to thrive long term and cosmically? And these were things that I didn't have the answer to until I found community. And then through community, I found theological tools to deconstruct what I've been taught.
The two of you have, I think, one of the most interesting stories about how you got together. And especially, I remember your story of your very first date in the mall. Would you tell a little bit about how you got together?
So I had just within the last 6 months or so publicly transitioned. I was newly single and I was like, I need to get some more queer community. And Ameera had just moved to the area and she was like, I need to get some more community. And so we both ended up happening to connect on this social / dating-ish app called Lex that's aimed at marginalized genders. The last season of She-Ra had just come out, and the kiss that we all wanted kind of happened, and it was super like queer awesomeness.
She-Ra and the Princes of Power, all Netflix.
We loved it.
Okay, and I just have to say, having been to your house, okay, Julia and Ameera have She-Ra pictures all over the house. It's every single character.
But so, okay, I got on this app that someone had recommended, and I did like a global search for anyone talking about She-Ra, and there were no hits. And so I had this kind of joke, tongue-in-cheek post, and I was like, I was told this was a queer app. How come no one's talking about She-Ra? And and Ameera saw that and just hit me up, and we just started laughing and talking about that. And it was kind of funny because we were both 100% on the same page. I am not interested in dating anybody right now, but we did want community. We wanted more friends. So we met up. We had had this little queer brunch that Ameera had organized, and we had a really good time at that. And I was like, well, I really like to go shopping for some gender affirming clothes, especially like interview clothes. And it would be nice to go with someone. And so we decided to go to the Mall of America the next day.
And for allies watching, that's a big deal because it's hard. It's scary to go shopping for gender affirming clothes when you're alone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. My first time, I remember I walked into a Target and I didn't even know like my sizes and like how to figure that out. And I'm alone standing in a women's section dressed in masculine attire because it's all I had. And I'm like, this is so awkward. This is what are people thinking, and what even looks good on me? And I don't know. It was pretty nerve-wracking. But yeah, no, so it was really great to have someone who was willing to go with me and we could have fun, like turn it from like an anxious experience into an enjoyable experience. And when we did, we had so much fun doing that. I spent way too much money on clothing. But it was so cool to like take pictures of the different outfits with each other. And so anyway, we had a blast and we're walking back out to the parking lot, laughing, smiling, holding hands, joking, two very obviously queer people. This young woman approaches the both of us and she says, God illuminated the two of you. I just had to come over and introduce myself. Do you believe in Jesus? And Ameera, in her head, this isn't a missionary. This is just someone who loves Jesus and wants to talk about it. And so her face just lights up and she goes, of course I believe in Jesus. I'm Muslim. And this person has this expression like, what is happening right now? Like, they didn't tell me how to respond to this situation because she's so into talking with this person and who's like, promised that she's going to pray with us. And we end up having like a half an hour long conversation.
I'm just talking about, and you sounds like it'd be a conversation with us and her, but it was really just a conversation between me and Julia where we were getting to know each other's spirituality and this random woman just being like, what have I created?
Yeah, didn't realize I was interfering with someone's first date and that they are both into spirituality and are now, yeah.
So I talked all about like Jesus and Islam and like how he is looked up as like one of the holiest prophets of God and how, his family is also like one of the like Maryam, right? Mary is viewed as like a holy figure in Islam as well. And like talking about all of this historical context and theological context. And Julia, with her science brain, is coming and talking about, how science and religion are not at odds with each other. And so we're kind of like talking on different wavelengths, but on the same wavelength, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually this missionary woman like just doesn't know what to do and goes bye and just pieces and just runs away. And we're like, oh, and Ameera's like, but I thought we were going to pray together. She was the great catalyst for like us getting so much closer. We kept the conversation going. We got into the car. We drove back to her little tiny apartment she was living in. She made me a nice dinner. We watched some anime. And the next thing I knew, it was 3 days later and I hadn't gone home yet. The whole plan that we were definitely 100% on board with about definitely not dating anyone clearly backfired. So our first date that was just supposed to be a friend date lasted 3 days. I went home for about 8 hours to go to sleep. And then the next morning, she sends me a picture of brownies she's taking out of the oven. And I thought to myself, it would be rude not to go over there. And I think it was there for like 3 weeks at that point. And somewhere along the way, we I guess agreed that we were in a relationship. So yeah, we met in like August. And then Ameera bought a house that we moved into together at the very end of December. We moved in on the 30th. Then at our New Year's Eve party, she proposed. Of course, I said yes. We got married the following April on 4/3/2/1.
Yes.
That's perfect.
I'm curious about your families. How did they react to the fact that you announced that you were getting married? And did you have any pushback from them? Either of you?
There's only so much of my family I'm actually in contact with, but my mom was super supportive. You know, my stepfather was supportive, my step siblings, but like I don't really talk to my dad very much, so I have no idea what he thought about it. I did send him an invite. He did come, but it's a sort of awkward relationship. Ameera's family was another story.
The first person I came out to in my family as trans, first of all, was my grandpa, and he was very, very accepting. He actually said to me afterwards, we see that God has created the day and the night, and God has created the land and the sea. So do I not believe in the sunset, or do I not believe in the shoreline? Those are creations of God too, just as equal. So he saw my being trans as like on this just spectrum of creation and of
Although speaking of your grandparents, I met them first on a Zoom call, and the first time I was on the call, I was wearing a hijab,
the headscarf.
The headscarf. Because of that, they assumed that I was a cis woman. Grandma loved me. She said, like,
when are you gonna get married? That's what she has said.
And then she only found out like a week or two later that I was trans also. And so I think she was the one person that was like maybe not LGBT supportive, that was like, unfortunately, I already like Julia.
My mother and father, they did not attend my wedding. None of my other like sort of blood family members did, except for my sister. She did end up coming. It ended up being mostly like my chosen family, like my community that I had from all across, the world. So obviously, like from Bangladesh, my grandpa was supposed to join and he couldn't make it, but we still had friends from like Canada and Europe.
It was a really, really beautiful ceremony. I remember being there and how privileged I felt to be able to be on that Zoom call. It was very moving.
It's almost an act of defiance times to like have a queer wedding. And so it's meaningful, I think, for a lot of our community to see this sort of thing happen. That we had an actual wedding, because a lot of folks are in places where they can't do that.
Do you have any last words that you'd like to share with us?
My number one advice for people who are allies, what I had to do for a very long time to learn how to be an ally to like Black folks, because I had no idea about what their experience was like. The way I was able to empathize was by shutting up and listening. And that, I think, is the first step of a long journey of like solidarity and allyship. So.
And you've shared a story here that many of us would never get to hear apart from you coming and being willing to share with us. So thank you. For many of us, this is our first step to coming and listening.
I'd like to thank you so much for bringing us on your podcast. This has been a wonderful experience.
It just is wonderful to see how happy you clearly are. That's pretty obvious. I can see that just by looking at how you look at each other. It's the way life should be. You're fortunate. When the right one comes along, you know it. And here for you folks is a right podcast that came along.
We are trying to bring you every single Monday morning another positive story where you can feel good about how you are, because we're all different. Every one of us is who we are, and this is who we're supposed to be.
And of course, I want to remind you that we'll see you Monday.